Death. Maybe the only concept that is truly universally impartial when it comes to us humans, immune to fictitious things like gender, race, politics, age, and religion. Maybe that's why it's become a touchy subject for so many people, and why we see it so prevalent in fiction and art. From the grand requiem masses to the countless paintings depicting death in so many ways across so many cultures, from ancient Japanese Bushido poems to angel beats, death can be explored in fiction because we can mask it with adventure and fun. We don't have to confront it head on. It doesn't quite feel like a real subject. And games are no exception. Countless games explore death, and even more use it as a tool. Like any other fiction story, it can be the inciting incident, or it can be the big finale to any epic. But in fiction, death isn't something you can just throw in and expect people to accept. So why does this work? And this, not so much. Because in fiction, death is actually much more complicated than most people might think. And creators have to put a lot of thought into who is dying and why. And we're not talking about these kinds of deaths. We're talking about specific characters dying. Characters with a lot of weight put on them. The first thing we have to consider is the world the characters are in. Some games, such as, say, Animal Crossing, don't really have a fitting world for characters to just up and die. Now compare that to A Song of Ice and Fire, which in the first book makes it evidently clear that no characters are safe. Now compare those two to Lord of the Rings. Did we ever really think Aragorn was going to die? No, probably not. But does that make it a bad story? Well, of course not. It doesn't detract from the story at all. It just doesn't quite fit the world that has been presented to us. But it goes much deeper than that. A death has to be set up properly to hit the right impact it's going for. Now, if we're looking at impact, take this scene from Soma. While it's not a death, why does this scene still seem incomplete? Probably because of the character here. Carl isn't someone we know or even care about. Imagine if the scene was later on in the game and Catherine was the one being shocked. The impact would have been significantly more disturbing, but also much more effective. That's because we get to know Catherine, who she is, and we build a bond with her. Having one for shock value can shock the player, sure, but it doesn't leave the same impact as, say, this. In fact, Eris' whole character was crafted likely with this particular scene in mind. Great care was taken to make this death as impactful to the player as possible. She was the main female lead, someone the main character was in love with. She was kind, but still headstrong. She was the last of her race, the last Cetra, and was the only hope of defeating Sephiroth. In fact, when she died, she was actually praying at a holy site, trying to help people. And have you ever noticed that the only two places flowers grow in all of Midgar are Eris' house and the church? Hence why so many people call her the Flower Girl. And this is similar to how the sun actually shines through onto Eris' house, while most of the rest of Midgar is dark and in shade. In fact, Eris' whole aesthetic was a sharp contrast to Midgar. Then there's the fact that Eris was a healer, someone who helped the group even during the combat. And that's the gameplay, not even just the cutscenes and story. Then there's the scene itself. It happens when she's vulnerable and helping people. It's at a holy place, an actual sanctuary, a safe space. After that, the player's faked out, and the characters too, into thinking she's gonna be okay. And then the scene cuts the music, and there's nothing the player can do but watch. Then, right on cue, everything the player has done with her, every touching moment that the player's brain has associated this theme with, is washed back into the player's mind. On a co-optional podcast, Jesse Cox once said this:
The best part about video games to me, the part that lingers the most, isn't necessarily the characters or this. It's the music from the games that takes you back to that moment in the game.
And he's right. Humans have a natural way of remembering things with music and strong emotions that are attached to music. So having a melancholic tone was perfect because it can seem almost like a love song, but in another instant, it can be absolutely heartbreaking. And keep in mind, this was at a time when Final Fantasy wasn't really in the habit of killing off main characters. Nowadays, it seems like something every Final Fantasy has to do. But at the time, Eris' death was so out of the blue, people couldn't really believe it. Now, fast forward 20 years, Final Fantasy XV does the exact same thing with Lunafreya. She's built up as someone who helps people. She's the person the main character's in love with. She's kind but headstrong. And she's also extremely underwhelming. That's mainly because she's absent. Where is she during the entire game? All we get are the occasional dog message and only 2 to 3 cutscenes. That's it. It's hard to build up a connection with someone when you don't spend any time with them. I found the first half of Final Fantasy XV to be really enjoyable. You could do missions with each of the characters and learn about their backstories and learn to care about them. Had Luna been one of them, it would have been so much harder to see her die. And I think that's where the mentality of the design was different. Eris was a character created with her death in mind. Luna was a character created for her death. She felt much more like a token, someone who had to die to propel Noctis on his path. Eris felt like a character who happened to die. She felt like she was part of the group because, well, she was a part of the group. I was sad for Eris and Cloud in Final Fantasy VII, but in Final Fantasy XV, sure, it's sad Luna died, but I'm only really sad for Noctis, because he's the one we've learned to care for. And even then, it's hard to fully accept the fact that they were so in love, because we never really see it. And I do understand that Luna was supposed to have a much bigger role, and that Final Fantasy XV had a lot of hiccups, which would account for a lot of its issues, especially in the second half of the game. But we can only judge what we can play. And there's a lot of other great deaths out there, and a lot of not so great ones. The key is fitting it into your story. If you're designing a game, don't think you need death for it to succeed, but if it fits the story and has significance, then go ahead and use it, but do it right. It makes a difference, and people will remember it long after. It separates this from this, and gamers can see that the difference is night and day.